Hi, everybody. Be on here with an update. Lots and lots and lots to talk about today with this tropical storm, soon to be hurricane. By the way, folks, if you have a question, if you could put a Q colon in front of it, I'd appreciate it. That helps me sort out the folks that are just saying hello from specific questions. Q colon in front of the questions, please. Hi, everybody. Good to see you on from Margate and Tampa, Wauchula, Pembroke Pines, and Davie. Lots of information here this afternoon. Hi, everybody, and good Tuesday afternoon. Here we have so much information this afternoon. In fact, I can't do all the details. So what I really want everybody to be sure they're doing is knowing what the alerts are for your area. I'm going to give you the overview in the state of Florida, and we'll talk about as many specifics as we can. But there is so much going on. There are evacuation notices of one variety or the other out along the East Coast from Palm Beach County to Volusia County for a variety of reasons, mostly for the barrier islands and for mobile homes and housing that might not do well in hurricane force winds. But it's really important that everybody that is near the East Coast of Florida understand what the alerts are for their particular area, because they vary significantly. So if you're in a hurricane warning area, if your phone is lighting up and saying hurricane warning for your area, be sure you know what the alerts are, especially if you're near the water. So that's a really important thing. So let's go through it, and then I'll get to your questions. And somebody says I'm muted. I don't show myself as muted. You all can hear me, right? Let me go up here. Somebody tell me that you can hear me, because I want to be sure. I'm pretty sure you can hear me, so I'm just going to continue on here. Okay, so because I'm getting a lot of thumbs up, so I think that you can hear me okay. I don't know, but somebody said that they couldn't hear me. So, okay, so let me go through what I have here, and then we'll talk about whatever questions you have, and there are a lot of questions that are pouring in, and we'll get to them. So let's look at the satellite picture. So if you were here yesterday, remember we had this comma-shaped system that was something like this, and we were speculating at that time the strongest winds were out here in the comma, and they were not related to the center. Well, that's changed. We talked about the possibility of that changing yesterday, and we were kind of hoping that it wasn't going to develop a core around the center, but that has indeed happened today. So the National Hurricane Center forecast is turning out to be quite good in terms of this thing pushing up toward hurricane strength as it approaches the Bahamas and the state of Florida. Let me say right now, once again, that this is not, cannot, will not be a Hurricane Dorian or Hurricane Ian where it blows up into some big, strong Category 3, 4, 5 storm near the coast. The atmospheric conditions just are not conducive to that. This is a whole different kind of storm, and it's a giant storm. They just increased the tropical storm alerts up into South Carolina. It is so big in diameter. And then we have this center here that's about 60 miles out from the center of the storm that has a core of the strongest winds now. They're not out on the flanks, they're near the center. Let's look at that close up here, and you can see, let me drag that down a little bit, and you can see up in here, this band here actually has the strongest winds, but it's trying to wrap around the center, and as it tries to wrap around the center more and more, that's the storm intensifying. So what we're going to have is an area of the most intense winds that are something like this, and then we're going to have a broad area, hundreds of miles wide going to the north that are going to be strong winds. Are going to be winds gusting to 60 or 70 miles an hour, where the winds in this area closer to the center are going to be gusting to 70, 80, 85 miles per hour, something like that, sustained near hurricane strength. So that's the difference. So the core right in here, strongest winds with strong disruptive winds extending way out. So here we can see that. Here is the National Hurricane Center. Here are the winds that are strong and could be disruptive, but are not the hurricane strength winds that we have in this area near the center in a much smaller area right there. Notice these winds are coming in from the northeast, and so that's pushing the ocean water on against the state of Florida, and it's even pushing it down here into South Florida in Broward and Miami-Dade County, where this is not going to be a big windstorm in Miami-Dade especially, a little gustier in Broward, but some of this water being pushed against the coast is going to cause water rise in the intracoastal and places exposed to the ocean. So let's take a look here as we move on and watch and you see the cone here, and you see the forecast from the Hurricane Center is that by the time it gets here in the vicinity of the Bahamas, we have a 75-mile-an-hour hurricane coming ashore somewhere from the Palm Beaches on up to the Space Coast, including the Treasure Coast. Now, I'm going to show you in just a minute how that wind distribution works, but just talk about the peak winds, peak sustained winds here in the 75-mile-an-hour range. And then notice the storm kind of curves to the north, remembering that the worst of the weather is on the right side, this side of the storm. So that includes all of the Orlando, Melbourne, Daytona Beach metropolitan area in terms of getting gusts up in the 60-mile-an-hour range. The Hurricane Center is saying 65 miles per hour for a sustained wind somewhere in that area, so maybe some gusts up to 70, 75 miles per hour in Central Florida. Now, we've been through this drill in Central Florida. Winds like that can take down trees, take out power. This is not a a devastating hurricane kind of situation, but hurricane force winds can take down trees, especially, and signs, and that, of course, sort of thing. So this is a situation where everybody needs to be thinking about where their car is parked and so forth. Like, you don't want to park it under a tree or a tree limb in Central Florida. So that's critical here for everybody in that part of the state. And then you see that the storm goes north. Now, the question is it going to track out here, or is it going to stay over land and obviously weaken faster? If it tracks off and goes over the Gulf, it might intensify just a little bit, but the intensity isn't the thing so much. The question is, if it gets up here near Tallahassee somewhere, up in this area, then the winds are going to come in like this, and at least for a while, storm surges are going to get pushed in north of Tampa Bay and to some degree in Tampa Bay. So that's all related to exactly where it tracks. That's not going to happen so much if it tracks on the right side of the cone. But that possibility exists for 2 to 4 feet, and I'll show you that in more detail in a second, in these areas up around Newport Richey, but off to the coast in that kind of marshy area in that part of Florida. So watch as it comes in now. So here we are now, 2 o'clock in the morning, late tomorrow night and into Wednesday morning. Notice these are the hurricane force sustained winds. These are the hurricane force gusts. And this is assuming the center tracks right down the middle of the cone. So as I was saying, everything is to the right side. Everything is to the north side here in terms of the strongest winds. Obviously, if it tracks a little farther south, makes a lot of difference in which of the northern Bahama Islands get the worst of the wind, right? If it goes a little farther south, more islands get it. A little farther north, fewer islands get it, because all this bad weather is there. Then it comes to Florida. Notice right down the middle of the cone, takes it the center into the Treasure Coast, puts the hurricane force winds up into the Space Coast, Melbourne, Palm Bay, Melbourne Beach, in the Atlantic, down to Sebastian, Vero Beach, and then you get into the stronger winds down in the Treasure Coast. But, of course, we don't know that it's not going to track a little farther south. That's why Palm Beach County has some evacuation orders out. We don't know that it's not going to track a little farther north. That might put the strongest winds up here into Volusia County, northern parts of Broward County. So that's why we have evacuation orders over this large area of the coast, because all this wind is pushing water ashore. And notice how far north the yellow, I'm focusing here on the hurricane force winds, but the yellow, these are still strong winds, maybe gusting to 60 miles an hour, pushing the ocean water into the St. Johns River here, for example, in and against the coast. In Volusia County, where Daytona Beach here is, the dunes were washed out in Hurricane Ian. So the water will come farther inland in that area. So this is why there are evacuation orders in those areas. Then the system comes up in the direction of Central Florida, and you can see where the strongest winds are, and that goes up into the Orlando metropolitan area. So this is all going to happen during the day Thursday, early in the morning Thursday. It starts that move. Later in the day Thursday, it's in Central Florida. So here are the vast area of all the alerts. So as I said when I started this, anybody that is in this hurricane warning area, if your phone is lighting up and saying hurricane warning, it's critical that you understand what the evacuation orders are for your area. Hurricane watch, possibility of hurricane force winds all the way up to Jacksonville, down into the Fort Lauderdale area, and then on west into Lake Okeechobee out there over the water. Okay, so those are, and then in the Bahamas, by the way, the automatic plotting is not working. There are technical reasons for that, but the hurricane warnings in the Bahamas are for the northernmost islands, including Bimini, and tropical storm warnings are in effect for these lower islands here, including Eleuthera, Andros, and New Providence. So tropical storm warnings down to the south, hurricane warnings to the north and the Bahamas. They ignore the colors. The machine is not plotting them correctly. Now, tropical storm warnings. Tropical storm warnings mean winds gusting potentially near hurricane strength, but sustained 50, above 40 miles an hour. That's what that means. But 50, even 60 miles an hour. Notice this includes all of the central part of the state and includes the Orlando metropolitan area on up to Gainesville, looks like, and on down to all those counties up and down the center of Florida, now under a tropical storm warning. So what this means is, for most people, it means where do I park my car? Let's be smart about parking the car, because the worst thing is to park it under a tree and have a big branch fall off the tree, smash the car, and it was all because you didn't park the car in the right place. Also, you don't want to leave things lying around outside. If winds are gusting to 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, even 70 or 75 miles an hour, that can pick up trash cans. So this calls for a lot of common sense of not leaving things outside and parking the car in a good place or anything valuable and so forth. And when the winds are blowing, don't stand next to the windows. So let me go back there, because I wanted to be very clear about all those alerts. Then we also have a tropical storm watch for the west coast of the state. A watch means all that stuff I was just talking about is possible, but that would be if the storm stays to the left side of the cone. Remember that this is a very right side loaded thing. So if the storm comes in, the center comes in something like this, the worst weather is going to be on this side. So it would have to take a track more on that left side of the cone in order for those stronger winds to affect where you see in yellow there. So that's why they just have a tropical storm watch up in effect for that area. Same thing for Miami-Dade County. Here, the storm would have to stay far left, so it's just a possibility of winds there sustained over 40 miles an hour. But everybody in the peninsula and even into the Panhandle is going to know that a tropical storm or hurricane is going by. This is going to affect everybody. All right, and then we have the storm surge threats. So the reason for the evacuation orders is because of storm surge. It's because the ocean water is being pushed over the land. And as I mentioned, in this area where the strongest winds are likely to be, that's where the biggest storm surge is likely to be, and I'll show you that in detail in a second. But the warnings go all the way up to the Brunswick area in Georgia and all the way down to Boca Raton in Florida. And a warning is issued anytime the water is forecast to be 3 feet or higher above the normal high tide. So the water in that whole warning area is forecast at the beach to be that high. So, if you live near the beach, you know what high tide is. Imagine 3 feet of additional water. And in this case, it's 3 to 5 feet of additional water that for most of that area that you need to imagine. I'll talk about this here in just a second on the west coast of Florida. So here's the specific forecast. The 3 to 5 feet, again, above normal high tide is for on up to Brunswick, Georgia, on down here to Palm Beach County. Then 2 to 4 feet farther south, and then 1 to 2 feet in Miami-Dade County. Now, on the west coast of the state, so this is the biggest threat zone, is right in here, from Volusia County on down to Palm Beach County. That's the biggest threat zone because that's where the ocean water is going to be pushed in. Now, on the west coast of the state, this is dependent on the track. And what the concern is like we talked about, if the storm were to take a track something like this, for example, up toward Tallahassee, then we would get the circulation pushing water into the Big Bend and on down here to just north of Tampa Bay, where storm surge is it's very prone to storm surge on that coast. So there's going to be time tomorrow to look at this. It's going to take time to get there and let the track get refined. But anybody from up around Franklin County on down to Tarpon Springs or so, you all just stay in close touch with what's going on if you're near low-lying areas there that are near the water. In Tampa Bay, in the immediate Tampa Bay area, the forecast right now is for 1 to 3 feet. Again, that's only going to happen if the storm stays a little bit left and that gets enough of a push of water into Tampa Bay. But they want everybody to be ready for that possibility. So that's why that forecast is in effect. So here's the overall cone to just check out one more time. So tomorrow afternoon, it reaches hurricane strength near the Bahamas. It's now from the Palm Beaches up to the Space Coast, Treasure Coast, somewhere in that area for the hurricane force winds coming in. Remember, at the same time, the entire coast here is subject to winds over 40 miles an hour in the 50, 60 mile an hour range, all the way up into the Carolinas, and even up, by the way, to Cape Hatteras, way north. This is going to affect the coastline. And then Central Florida, looking for winds in the strong tropical storm range, gusting to near hurricane strength, remembering that the worst of the winds are to the right of the track. The storm tracks this way. The worst of the winds are on this side of the track. And then on up into Georgia, and it dies out pretty quickly in terms of the wind, but merges with a cold front and becomes a kind of nasty storm going all the way up the East Coast, but not as a tropical system. It's going to be more like a nor'easter. And Nicole will be done by the time it's in Georgia or South Carolina. Looks like that's going to happen about Friday, maybe into Saturday. In terms of people that look at the models, what do they mean? Here's what they say. You notice that let's go ahead and put on the consensus model. Consensus model is a little farther north. Hurricane Center is thinking that the consensus model might be a little biased. They're going with the European model and the UK Met a little farther south here, but there is a little uncertainty, so I want everybody in that hurricane warning area to not be concentrating on the models, not be concentrating on the cone, and be going with what the warnings are for your area. The bottom line is the entire peninsula and part of the Panhandle is going to feel the effects of this storm to one fashion or the other. Okay, that was a lot. So let me get to your questions and comments here. I'm going to put in Q:. So let's say, what can we expect in the villages? You can expect a tropical storm in the villages. That's going to happen. The winds are going to pick up on Thursday in the villages. So, you got to prepare for the power to be out and use some care on where your car is parked. Don't have things outside that might blow around in the wind. But the indications are, as we see here, the villages are right in line for the center. Now, if the center comes right over top of you, remember that the worst wind, most of it is to the right. But you need to be ready for a strong tropical storm there in the villages. How about in Flagler Beach? I mean, everybody obviously is in one location or the other here. Flagler Beach so it really depends. If you're right on the beach in Flagler Beach, and it really depends on what your elevation is, because the forecast is for high tide to be 3 to 5 feet above normal there. And if I don't know what the dune situation is in Flagler Beach, I know in that area, many of those dunes were washed away by Ian. If you're under an evacuation order, you have to consider your situation there and probably evacuate if you're in an area where the dunes have been washed out. Let's mention Southwest Florida. We're not concerned about Southwest Florida. You're going to feel in Southwest Florida the winds coming off the Gulf. It's going to be quite breezy there, but we're not concerned of a significant storm effect in Southwest Florida, even if it were to take the left side of the cone somehow. And we know that sometimes storms do that. Remember that the bad weather is on the right side of the track in this case. So we're feeling good about Englewood, Fort Myers, Naples in Southwest Florida. Again, not that it's not going to get quite breezy, but that is the impacts look like they'll be minimal. How about in Broward County? Minimal impacts? Probably not too much, but you're going to know that there's a significant storm not that far away. This has a pretty big area of wind, but the wind in Broward is almost certainly going to come off the land, come around this way, so that then you don't get the strongest wind when you get it off the land. But, use good sense. Don't park your car under a tree. You could get tropical storm force winds. There is a hurricane watch in effect. So that means there's some concern of the winds gusting up to near hurricane strength. So good sense. Pembroke Pines, same thing. Impact on Coconut Grove, that's Miami. That's minimal. Okay, my grandson is in Port St. Lucie. Port St. Lucie may very well get the brunt of this storm. Port St. Lucie, depending on where you are, most of Port St. Lucie is not on the coast, it's inland. So that means evacuations would not be the issue, but near the coast, evacuations might be required if you're in the Port St. Lucie, Fort Pierce area. But so you tune into what St. Lucie County is saying, but you have to use good sense here. And in Port St. Lucie, if you have shutters, I'd be using the shutters because hurricane force winds are forecast now for St. Lucie County and the whole Treasure Coast. So if you're going to do shutters, you need to do them quickly. The rule is if you're going to get a hurricane, then you put up shutters. My rule is, I should say my rule, my personal rule is for a hurricane, I put up shutters. For a tropical storm, I don't put up shutters because, I'm talking about panel shutters, because it's kind of dangerous to be putting them up when the wind is blowing. Let's see. Could Nicole be a strong Cat 1? Yes, it could. It's coming together so quickly here that it could. The atmospheric pattern over the storm is not really conducive to significant strengthening, but it is strengthening and it is organizing. So I wouldn't say that it's impossible. I would say, though, that the atmospheric pattern would seem to limit it to a lower end Cat 1. But I wouldn't rule out certainly wind gusts up in the 80 or 90 mile an hour range. How about in Claremont? So I don't know. There we go. Bring in yard stuff. Absolutely. Everywhere in Central Florida. Metropolitan Orlando, Daytona Beach, Melbourne, Claremont, Sanford, Winter Park. Everybody in Central Florida. This is for tomorrow now. This is going to happen. This really isn't going to happen until Thursday there. But this is, be figuring out, okay, where am I going to park my car? What am I going to pick up? Let's be thoughtful about, what kind of stuff might blow around in a very gusty wind situation everywhere in Central Florida. This is a reminder here. The Palm Beach County Mayor ordered Zone A and B mandatory evacuations. No word from Boca Raton. Of course, Boca is in Palm Beach County. So the main issue in Palm Beach County is the barrier island and people that live right on the ocean. And the forecast, let me just confirm the storm surge forecast because I don't have that in my mind. So Hallandale to North Palm Beach, so 2 to 4 feet for Palm Beach County, including the Boca Raton area. The concern and why the mayor of Palm Beach County ordered an evacuation is if the storm were to stay to the left side here, then Palm Beach County would be involved. But remembering that our expectation is that the worst weather is going to be mostly north, but it's a close call for Palm Beach County. They're not going to take any chance with people being caught on barrier islands, so that's why they went ahead and ordered an evacuation. Boca is obviously in the southern end of Palm Beach County, so the odds are lower of a problem in Boca, but according to the orders, as far as I know, that Zone A and B would include the Boca area, so let your conscience be your guide in terms of understanding it. But the forecast right now is 2 to 4 feet of ocean water above the forecast of the normal high tide in Palm Beach County and Broward County. That's the current forecast for storm surge. north of Palm Beach County all the way up to Georgia, it's 3 to 5 feet above normal high tide. Okay, let me see. Lots of, well, we don't talk enough about our friends in the Bahamas because the Bahamas is such a great place, and they're still suffering from Hurricane Dorian. What will the surge be in Freeport in the Bahamas? So it's really hard to say. If you're on the North Shore, if the storm stays north and you get a north wind, they're forecasting 4 to 6 feet above normal tide levels there. So depending on your elevation in Freeport, there are low elevations there on Grand Bahama, but there are also high elevations as well. So depends on really where you are, but that's the forecast. The thing is that we don't know exactly what direction the winds are going to be because a slight difference in the track makes a tremendous difference in the winds. But the forecast is 4 to 6 feet of storm surge in the Bahamas where the winds are onshore from the northeast wind, east wind, or north wind. But the track makes so much difference there. If the storm tracks down here, then you're going to get a north wind in Freeport, northeast and north wind, and that's going to be a problem. If the storm tracks more over top of you, you're not going to get that so much. So it's too close to call at this point. But don't take chances, obviously. If you're right near the water in a low-lying area, this would call for an evacuations. There's a question about school closings. Everybody needs to evaluate, find out what the local word is. Last I heard, there was no word. I haven't heard a word out of Miami-Dade County. But again, all over the state of Florida, there's going to be different closings of all kinds of things. So this is something you're going to have to check with your local officials, watch the local news, stay up to date of what is going on in your local area. And this is true into Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina as well, because near the coast, there are going to be effects. How about shutters? Well, here's what I say about shutters. Definitely not in Homestead. If it were me, I wouldn't be putting up shutters in Miami-Dade County. But shutters in general in the state of Florida, like I said, my rule is I put up shutters if a hurricane is forecast for my area, but the winds are already starting to blow. So if you're in an area where you're exposed to these breezy winds coming in off the ocean already, then you got to be very careful, and I would have help putting up the shutters. So you're going to have to evaluate in your location whether am I taking a bigger chance by not putting up the shutters or a bigger chance by handling these big metal things in my hands when the wind is blowing. So I wouldn't want you to get hurt putting up your shutters. So shutters are difficult. But anyway, that's my rule. I don't put up shutters for tropical storms. I put up shutters for hurricanes. So some parts of the state of Florida, hurricane force winds are indeed forecast. Let's see. Brunswick, Georgia. It's mostly it's going to be quite breezy in Brunswick and storm surge. So if you're right near the water, staying close touch with local officials there because they're forecasting 3 to 5 feet of water above normal high tide. And so a number of areas around Brunswick are very subject to storm surge. So again, check with local officials and exactly what they're telling you. If they're going to evacuate anybody, they're going to recommend you not travel on certain roads that might be flooded and so forth at high tide, especially over the next few days, because this is going to be relentless, this wind pushing water inland. Let me just show you on the map here why this is especially bad, because remember, the wind comes around like this, around the storm, right? If it's going in the cone. Well, what's happening on this side? The wind is coming in this way. And then the storm gets up here, and the wind is coming in this way, and it's still pushing water toward the coast. So until it gets past you, like on Friday, then the winds are finally going to change to a different direction, and they're still going to come from the south, and that's still pushing winds to some degree toward the coast. So this is going to be a long duration of winds being, water being pushed toward the coast in Georgia and the Carolinas and in Florida as well. It's just going to be a different set of days, and that's why this storm surge threat near the coast is unusually big for something that is a tropical storm or a Category 1 hurricane. Let's see. Here's a question about how rare are hurricanes hitting the U.S. in November. Doesn't happen very often, Tyler, but it happens. This is only the second in the record book of a storm coming from the Atlantic and hitting Florida. The last one was in 1935. It was a 100-mile-an-hour hurricane that went right over downtown Miami. It was a really freak kind of storm. In 1985, we had Hurricane Kate, which came up into the Panhandle just east of Panama City. So it happens. It doesn't happen very often, but it's not an absolutely unheard of kind of event. Let's see. What's the effect on the airports tomorrow? Well, we know that Orlando is going to close. So my guess is I haven't seen the details of but most airports, I suspect, in Central Florida are going to be affected. I haven't seen any kind of compilation of the airports. And by the way, the question is not so much is the airport going to close. The question is, are the airplanes going to fly? And that's a question for the airline. So you really need to check with your airline, because a lot of times flights are canceled not because the airport closes, but because the airline cannot get the crew in the right place to fly the plane, or some other kind of problem related to the storm affecting the way the airline operates. So airlines cancel flights way before airports close. So it's not really a question of will the airport close. Here's a question about the Jacksonville area and the loss of power. Well, first of all over the Florida Peninsula, people need to be ready for the power to go out. When we get winds over 40 miles an hour, gusting 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, that always knocks out power, because that takes down tree limbs, that takes down trees, that takes down power lines. So we need to be ready for the power to go out. This isn't going to be a Hurricane Irma or an Ian situation where we have vast areas of the state without power. That would be very unlikely, but I'll be shocked if we don't have pretty significant area, I don't want to say widespread power outages, but over a lot of the state. I'll be surprised if we don't have some areas without power. Now, in terms of flooding in Jacksonville, flooding is now forecast in Jacksonville along the St. Johns and Jacksonville Beach, and right along Atlantic Beach and so forth there, right at the coast, because the ocean level is forecast to be 3 to 5 feet above normal high tide, and that water coming into the St. Johns and down to the Fuller Warren Bridge, which is down past downtown Jacksonville, and as the river heads south, all that is in the lower lying areas there subject to flooding, because the river is still in flood stage farther south down around Lake George. So this Ian water is still working its way out, and that Ian water is trying to go north, while the Nicole water is going to get pushed in this way into St. John's. The St. John's is a really unusual river. It goes like this. So water gets pushed in off the ocean this way, and then the rainwater drains in this way and tries to get out, and then it all kind of bottles up in Jacksonville and points just south of Jacksonville. So yes, that is anticipated flooding, especially in the northern end of the St. Johns River basin there, and some power outages in greater Jacksonville, Duval County, and the surrounding areas. That would be more late Thursday into Friday. The winds won't be as strong by then, but still should be strong enough to cause some power outages. Do you think schools will close in Broward again? I just want everybody's got to check with their local area on schools. Shutters for both Boca and Cape Canaveral. Cape Canaveral, yes. Boca, maybe, with the caveats I talked about before. It depends on if, and again, shutters are if you're talking about putting up panel shutters or putting up plywood or something like that, then you got to weigh the danger of doing it with the wind already blowing to some degree against the danger of not doing it. We're talking about a strong tropical storm, Category 1 hurricane here. So not something that's going to pick up heavy debris, but certainly could take a tree limb down and smash it against a window. So this is a fine line. You have to make a local personal judgment there about what you want to do about shutters in your area. When will it be possible to drive from Vero Beach to Miami? On Thursday, Friday morning, or Friday evening? Friday for sure. I would say Friday will be your day. Let the storm get farther past before you try and drive there, and be sure that there's not, something hasn't happened, that signs have fallen down across the road or there's some kind of disruption, but there shouldn't be. I think Friday will likely be fine to drive along I-95 or the Turnpike up to Vero. Here's a good question I haven't talked about. Will the storm drop a lot of water? So this isn't going to be a Hurricane Ian kind of monumental flood, but some flooding rain is possible with rainfall amounts up to 7 inches forecast. Most of the rain is forecast to fall on the eastern part of the state. So most of the rain will coming in bands coming off of the Atlantic. So the heaviest rain is likely to be in an area, I didn't draw that very well, but up to the eastern part of the state. Now, that includes up here in that St. Johns River Basin area, so that may exacerbate the flooding left over from Ian there. Not that, I think everybody in the peninsula is subject to getting, a rainy, nasty situation out of this, but the heaviest rain right now forecast in the eastern part of the state. How high could Coco's winds be? Well, Coco, if the storm does anything reasonably close to forecast here, if the storm were to take a track like that, and that's the center, say, remembering that the strongest winds are displaced on the right side here, you're going to be very close to that band of strongest winds. So plan for hurricane strength winds in the Cocoa Beach, Merritt Island area there in the central part of Brevard County. So, good sense about what you leave outside and where you park your car, what you do with your boat. Plan for hurricane conditions there in Brevard County. And stay in close touch with Brevard County Emergency Management. It's an excellent department there. If you're in Cocoa, you're not in an evacuation area, but there are some evacuation alerts out in Brevard County, so keep that in mind. More questions about schools. I don't know the answer to schools. I did see a report that Pasco County, which is just north of Hillsborough County being Tampa, Pasco County just to the north being Newport Richey and so forth. Pasco County did cancel school for Thursday. I haven't heard anything about Hillsborough. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I'm not in close touch with the whole school situation because it's a county by county basis. But in Pasco County, remember that there's the possibility of a storm surge threat there because of the way the coast is shaped, kind of catches the storm surge if the winds happen to come around off the water and push that water in. So that might be why they don't want people driving around and going to school in some of those lower lying areas along the river there and so forth, where it can flood if there's storm surge, which is dependent on the track of the storm on Thursday. So I don't know. I didn't see what their reasoning is, but that may be why they did it in Pasco County. But as far as every county and schools, tune into your local news or check your local school system and see. How about Tallahassee? Well, Tallahassee is not going to get the brunt of this, and most of the tracks take the center of the storm east of Tallahassee, remembering that the worst of the weather will be on the right side. So Tallahassee would not, in most scenarios, get a whole lot from this. You're going to get some gusty winds and know a storm is out there. But if it were to take the left side of the cone, that would bring it very near Tallahassee. And so we can't rule out tropical storm force winds there in Leon County. Just can't rule it out. The odds say no, but can't rule it out absolutely. Sebring. Well, Sebring here to the northwest of Lake Okeechobee. Again, Sebring, if the storm goes right down the middle of the cone, you're going to be on the so-called weak side of the storm. So again, you'll know there's a tropical storm going on. You'll get the rain, you'll get some gusty wind, but you'll be on the generally weak side. Unless the storm goes on the far left side of the cone, you're not going to get the worst of it, but you got to be ready for a significant windstorm late on or during the day on Thursday in the Sebring area, just in case. You'll know more tomorrow as the storm gets closer. Let's see, the low country of South Carolina. Well, in South Carolina, first of all, you're going to be on the right side of the storm, obviously. So this is going to be a gusty side of the storm. By that time, it should be, 40, 50 mile an hour wind gusts kind of thing. But along the coast in South Carolina, there is the possibility of storm surge. So in the Charleston area and the other low-lying areas in South Carolina, especially the southern part of South Carolina and into the Savannah area in Georgia, you need to be aware of the storm surge potential in that area, because the winds are going to blow onshore for a significant amount of time. It's dependent to some degree, because remember, this is a huge area of winds blowing like this. So just stay in close touch with local officials there in South Carolina. But it's going to be nasty because you're going to be on the so-called dirty side of the storm, rain, gusty winds, and that's going to happen Friday, it looks like, in South Carolina, beginning late Thursday into Friday. All right, folks, I got to go. I'll be on Fox Weather here in just a few minutes with an update, and of course I'll be back tomorrow, and this is all going to happen tomorrow night into Thursday morning in Florida, tomorrow during the day in the Bahamas. So everybody, once again, I just urge you to staying close with the alerts coming in on your phone and your local information, because it is going to be different in all different parts of the state, and the entire state is going to know that there is a storm hitting the state of Florida. It's just going to be tremendously different depending on the exact track, which side of the center track you're on, and exactly, but it's so big that everybody is going to feel it, even on the weaker side of the storm. And even in the Keys, the wind is going to come in from the northwest in the Keys. You're going to be aware there's a storm affecting the peninsula. All right, guys, everybody stay safe, stay informed, and we'll talk to you soon.